Welcome to another episode of Mexican in the Kitchen. Today I'm doing this recipe which I really like. It's very tasty, very easy to do, and it's that kind of recipe where you would use the leftover bread you have. You can use any bread you want. You can use a mix of them, and especially that bread that's getting old and it's quite hard now that maybe you cannot even eat by itself anymore. What I will do first is breaking this bread into smaller pieces. This is not completely necessary, but it makes the recipe easier. You could throw this on a bag and just smash it, make smaller pieces or crumbs. In this case, I'm just cutting it by hand, making smaller pieces. For this recipe, I'm using korpu. Here in Finland, you can get this bread, which is quite crispy. And it's a kind of bread that's quite hard, quite crispy, double toasted. You can maybe use it in the morning with a coffee. A lot of people might dunk it on the coffee kind of thing just to make it a bit soft. And you eat it like that. You can add some butter. It's really delicious, very nice flavor by itself. But in this case, I'm using it as if it was old bread. They also sell this bread with cinnamon and sugar already, so you could use that and then maybe just adjust the amounts of sugar and cinnamon, or if you want it extra sweet, then that would probably be alright. I'm going to start the recipe by adding these bread pieces into a different bowl. As you can see, I missed a couple breads, but I will cut those and then I can continue. Looking back, maybe there was no reason to change bowls, and I should have started on this larger one, but now we know. I'm going to start by adding 3 cups of milk. This can be between 720 and 750 milliliters, depending on where you live. I started with 720, and if you think the mix looks a bit dry, then you can add 30 more milliliters. The reason why we add the milk is because we want the bread to soften. So we will leave it there. Depending on the kind of bread, of course, it might need more or less time, but just give it some minutes and we'll come back to this. While I'm waiting for my bread to soak, I'm going to take a bowl and I'm going to crack 3 eggs in there. These are medium-sized eggs. There's not much to this. I just want to beat these eggs in a separate bowl so then we can add it to our mix. Once I'm done, I'm setting them aside because we are using them soon. My bread has been soaking for 3 to 5 minutes, and at this point, of course, the ones on top haven't soaked as much, and there's still quite a lot of liquid on the bottom. So I'm going to take a fork and I'm going to start smashing everything. I'm going to start also mixing, making sure the bread that's on the top gets some of that milk. And I'm just going to continue mixing for a while. I don't want to completely turn this into a paste, but I do want to break these pieces of bread into even smaller ones. I am using a fork, trying to mix everything, taking my time, but you can also use your hands, and of course it will be a bit faster. I have mixed my bread. I gave it some more time for the bread that was on top to go to the bottom, soak a bit of that milk. As you can tell, there's no more milk on the bottom. The whole mixture is now kind of even. There's still some breads that might be a bit drier than others, but in general, we have a bit of a paste, and then we have other pieces of bread. The textures might be different. You have a bit more drier breads. You have some that have turned completely into a paste. And at this point, this is how my mix looks, and I can continue adding my ingredients. Now that the bread is ready, I'm adding the 3 eggs. I will add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. As I said, if you use a bread that already has cinnamon, you might want to skip this. I'm adding 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm adding 100 grams of sugar, which should be around half a cup. If your bread has sugar already, I would recommend to reduce this maybe by half or by 1/3. I will also add 1/3 of a cup of melted butter. I waited for this to cool down a bit. I don't want to have it too hot, otherwise it might start cooking the eggs. It is about 75 grams. I'm also adding chopped walnuts and raisins. I'm adding 1/4 of a cup of each, which should be about 40 grams each. These two are completely optional. I really like having some crunchiness in this. I think it gives a really nice texture, and I love raisins. So I love that kind of combination of textures. And if you don't like one of these, you can substitute it for the other, or you can skip them completely. Once all of our ingredients are there, we are going to mix. We want to be very careful, very gentle. We want all of our ingredients to mix together, but we don't want to turn this into just a even paste. We want some of that texture. We want to still notice there was bread before. So just mix it until you are sure all of the ingredients are evenly distributed. You want to make sure there's egg everywhere, there's butter everywhere, there's sugar everywhere, and then we are ready. Now we want to take our pudding to the oven. So I'm using this tray for the oven. It's disposable and I'm greasing it with some spray. You can also use some butter. It depends on what you have, on what you prefer, but I find this to be way easier, way quicker. All we have to do now is add our mix, and then I'm using this spatula because it's easier to grab everything from our mixing bowl, and then we can just press it down. We want to be gentle. We don't want to press too hard. We don't want it to be too compact, but we also want to press enough that we make sure we don't have a lot of spaces on the side. Here I still have some spaces, so I added a bit more, and I'm just going to press. I'm going to try to make the surface as even as I can. Don't worry if you have some bumps, if you see some spaces in there, it doesn't really matter. At the end, when we're cooking these, you will notice it starts to fluff a bit. It's going to get a bit puffy, it's going to raise, and then it's going to become a bit lower after you take it off the oven. Don't worry, it's perfectly normal. So once we make sure it's even, then we can take it to the oven. My oven was preheated at 180 Celsius, which should be around 350 Fahrenheit. I'm going to throw it in there and I'm going to wait for it for about an hour. It should be ready in an hour, but just to be sure, because it depends on your oven and where you live, I would preferably check it after 50 minutes, and if it needs more, then I'll wait the 10 extra minutes. I checked mine after 50 minutes and it did need the whole hour. And after an hour, I checked it with a toothpick. You just stick it in there, take it out, and if the toothpick is clean, then your pudding should be ready. As I said, in the first minute or so after you take it out, you will notice how it kind of deflates a bit, but it's perfectly normal. Don't worry about it. It's expected. While this might not be the prettiest dessert you've seen, you have to keep in mind this leftover recipe, and it still will taste delicious. We can cut it here, or we can remove it from the container and cut it. As you can see, it came off the container quite easily, and it doesn't look the prettiest, but you can see how moist it looks. This pudding has a really nice texture. I love it. It's very moist. It reminds me a lot of a banana bread. You could also flip this back, set it on a plate, maybe add some powdered sugar on top, or you can serve it with some vanilla sauce or whipped cream. In my case, I just cut it into small squares because it was way easier to take with me in some container and just share it with my friends. This is how I make this bread pudding. I don't know if you can tell, here you can see the pieces of bread. If this is a personal preference, some people might want to destroy these pieces completely. I like to have these like changes in texture, because sometimes you get this a bit more moist, sometimes you get this a bit more like not really crunchy, but you can tell it was bread. Of course, if you want it to be completely smooth, very even, then when you're mixing this kind of like the bread with the milk, then you can go in with your hand, completely smash everything together, make sure it's very like even, and then of course this will be a bit more even. But I think it's really nice. It's very spongy. You can tell it's like a bit like a rubbery kind of texture, but it's still quite soft when you bite it. And then you have like a bit of a crust. I don't know if you can hear, but it's like quite crunchy on the top. Then you have a bit of the nuts from time to time. You get a really nice crunch. Then you have like the raisins as well in there, giving this like a bit more soft bites with a lot of like sweetness. These are really nice bread, especially if you have some leftover. Here I bought this kind of like hard bread already, but you know what I mean. Like if you have some leftovers, you can also make this recipe with a bit less ingredients. Just make a small amount on a small container kind of thing. It's a great bread. I really like it. They do this a lot in bakeries in Mexico, for example, with the leftover bread. They just mash everything, and they have a couple versions of this kind of leftover bread kind of recipes just to reuse everything. And I hope you like it. Hope you try it at home. Press like, activate the bell, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, all those kind of things, and see you in the next one.